everyone, Dr. Samantha Cutrara here, the Principal Storytelling Officer for the Histoire Source Story video series, a video series for Canadian history teachers where myself or a French host, we get to talk with historians and creators and curators and archivists about a variety of primary and secondary sources, and we ask, what is the source? What is the story, and how can teaching with it challenge Canadian history? Our goal in this series is to be able to ensure that you have the sources to tell these challenging stories that you want to do. I know so many of you are doing such amazing work in your classrooms related to critical thinking and inquiry and exploring history, and we want to be able to ensure that you have some sources to be able to do that, as well as some stories that can kind of go along with the ways that your students are presenting and piecing together the histories they are creating through inquiry. Thank you as always for the views and the shares. We had such a great season last year, and this whole month, this whole year of programming is amazing, but this whole month is so very exciting, and I'm really, as always, excited for today's video. Just before we begin, just a reminder that we are available on all of these social media platforms, so make sure that you're following us. Also, just comment below, like the video if you like it. Make sure you subscribe to our channel because we want you to join the conversation. So please let us know how you're thinking about using these sources in your classroom in the comments below. We also have full curated playlists for each video, and the playlist that we have for this video is great because it also includes some animated shorts related to or kind of associated with the person that we're talking to today. So make sure you check that out. I think I might be missing something, but it's okay. We will just kick off because I am very excited for today's talk because we are talking with a second author from This Place. This Place is this fantastic collection of Indigenous storytelling in graphic novel format about the history of Canada, the 150 Years Retold, about the histories of Canada, both the ways that, because it's graphic novels, but also because they are stories that come from Indigenous points of view, they are so rich at challenging Canadian history. Hey, Betty. And the fact that we get to, the fact that I've got to talk with two of the writers for the series has been amazing. And we also had a bonus video with one of the illustrators. And I've just really, sorry. Are we going to sit down? And I just felt so excited, but also really privileged to have these conversations. So that's the first reason why I'm excited that we're talking about This Place. But the second reason I'm excited is because specifically we're talking with Brandon Mitchell, who writes this fantastic story about not the 1981 raids, but the raids leading up to that. And it's really, really exciting to be able to hear about the fact that there are these histories that go before the histories that we learn about, or in this case, we might not learn about at all. So to bring this story in from a Micmac perspective is just really fantastic. And the third reason why I'm really excited is because we are going to be talking about this history, the history before the history, but then also things like storytelling, Indigenous storytelling, comic books, animation, and Brandon is just such high energy to be able to have another conversation about all of these elements together. I really hope that if you're not completely sold on bringing graphic novels into your classroom, both as teaching tools, but also as learning activities and learning assessments, I can guarantee that this one will sell you on it because he is such high energy. Let's go over to Zoom. Again, make sure you subscribe, like, comment if you would like, use the subtitles if that is great for you. Subscribe to also all our social media, and know that there are links below to learn more about Brandon and his work. But let's go over to Zoom and meet him for what I can only imagine will be a high energy and very exciting and entertaining talk. Brandon, hi. I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today. Before we begin, can you introduce yourself?
Well, Alan, thank you. I'm really grateful to be here too. So my name is Brandon Mitchell. I am Mi'kmaq from Listuguj, Quebec. and I am one of the contributing writers to this place, 150 Years Retold. My story is called Migwite'tmeg, and yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about it.
This is such a great collection, and I really appreciated the story that you told. But we're going to, before we get to the story in itself, our first question is, what is the source? And you have a source that's not actually covered or that's not actually featured in the story. So, what is your source?
Source, there was a lot of sources in this story, but what I wanted to, one of the things, one of the main sources for this story was my mother-in-law. When the idea of this project came about, I approached my mother-in-law, Norma Jean Martin, and I was really excited. I was like, I get to write about the salmon raids, and she's sitting on her chair at the kitchen table, and she looks at me and she's like, "Good, good." And then she points at me and she says, "You got to write about the first raid." And I was like, "Yep, that's what I'm here to do. I want to write about the first raid." Thinking in my mind that it was the June 11th raid in 1981. So we sat down. I asked her some questions about that day, or I thought I was asking questions about that day. And she gave me this really fascinating story about how the community rallied together and pushed, or were able to get the SQ off the reserve in a nonviolent way. And I was really enthralled by this story. I was like, I've never heard about this. And even in my research, when I was researching the story, I was like, I've never this never came up. And then so I started doing my first draft of the story, and I'm writing about it, and I was so happy about it. And I submitted that first draft. I wanted her to be the one to read the first draft, to make sure I captured the moment right. And she looks at it, and she didn't even get past the first line. When I started the story with June 11th, and she puts it down. She goes, "This is all wrong." And I was like, "What do you mean? This is the first raid." I was like, "Keep on reading." And she's like, "Yeah, this is the first raid, but this didn't happen on June 11th." And I was like, "This is everything that you told me." So yes, you have to write about the first raid. And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "This took place in 1980." And that's when it kind of clicked on, or not clicked, but another light bulb went up inside my mind. I was just like, "Well, what do you mean? There was more raids? I didn't hear about these other raids." And then she went into more detail about how this was a reoccurring event. Every June, the SQ would come in and confiscate our equipment and try to stop us from exercising our treaty right to harvest salmon. And that was where I had to take a step back a little bit and try and ask not so much the right question, but ask the question, like ask more probing questions about what actually happened. What was the lead up to June 11th in 1981? That's what got me more excited. I was like, okay, I need to know more. Like, what happened? And and that's when the question came. Not the question, but the revelation to me. Like, this was a reoccurring event, and 81 was the boiling point. Like, this is when it got like everyone in the community had enough. But this was a reoccurring event every June, and in June of 1980, they rallied together and were able to get we're able to peacefully, like I said, peacefully escort the SQ off of Listuguj land. So I found it really, really fascinating, and that's so I had to go back and it was one of those things where I was just like, okay, I gotta ask the right questions. I thought I was asking the right questions, but I need to like dig a little bit deep, not so much dig a little deeper, but be more precise in my questioning, and we sat down and we were able to really collaborate on on what happened leading up to the events leading up to June 11th.
Well, I love that you said, like, I have to ask the right questions, because our questions come from our own narratives. And so when the narrative of just the 1981 raid is the one that is in your head, then it is very difficult to be like, well, what happened? What about the other raids before this? And so I really just like love that as a way to kind of move forward with this conversation. And I also just want to say, like, I've never heard this story before.
So you and I are in the same boat. And like I said, when we started talking, and then once that revelation hit, that I was just like, so there was previous raids. And when I was writing the story some more, and I was doing like the academic thing and doing the research, like trying to find papers and articles on previous raids, there was very little written about previous raids. And the thing, what next to nothing. A lot of my research was like, if I found an article, it was about 1981, and the only reference to previous raids was just that. It was one sentence saying in previous raids, and I was just like, how can you that? And that's what kind of like got me. I wouldn't say it was upsetting, but I was just like, if the people they didn't, there should have been like a deeper dive into what was truly leading up to these things and what happened in past events, not just trying to condense it, and literally condensing history into one sentence. And I was just like, okay, that was a little upsetting to me. And I was like, okay, if I can have an opportunity to do some justice and preserving and telling our story, our perspective, that's what that was my aim for this story.
Yeah, we did a conversation. We did a public history event in June, and a couple of the archivists talked a lot about, colonial records and what that means for Indigenous scholars, Indigenous storytellers, Indigenous historians, and archivists who are trying to tell these broader stories. But when you're only pulling on colonial records, or what is recorded in kind of a colonial patriarchal like view of what a record is, then yes, it becomes consolidated to this one line, and then all of a sudden it seems like it came from nowhere. And so thank you for starting with your mother-in-law's story as the source to get into this.
That she was the catalyst for, like I said, not just the journey of the story, but my own journey in relearning our history. So I'm really grateful that she was able to share that and help me. I will use that term, and being an editor for the story, or shadow editor for the story.
Shadow editors are the best.
That's
and
right.
I also noticed that she is referenced right on the first page now. Like in your introduction, you definitely ground it with this source, which is really cool.
Yeah, and that's really important. I think it's in my academic journey. Yeah, like you just talked about, like, it has to be like vetted sources, or not vetted, but it has to be like the information is not valid if it's not published. This was an argument that I struggled with in terms of validating our stories, because I was just like, well, it's not the way I was raised, and the way that I move forward too is something that my parents installed into me too, is that we've lost our way, and we're not thinking like Ilnu people. Mi'kmaq, we're not thinking Ilnu. Ilnu is like Ilnu is just another word for us, for Mi'kmaq. And if we're not thinking Ilnu, then we're not being Ilnu. We're not telling our stories the right way, and we're not validating our stories. And so that was something in the back of my mind while I was writing this. Also, like, we need to. I don't want to say it was a responsibility, but I wanted to preserve this story, because another thing that was happening, I remember growing up. I remember when I was a little kid, I would hear stories about the raid. And it was just kind of like snippets, but it was like different perspectives from different people, like who are now like they're now my uncle, like they're older, my uncles and community members that are older now. But everyone was talking very passionately about it in the 80s, and as time went on, we didn't hear those stories anymore. And as more time went on, nobody was talking about them anymore. And I was just kind of like, okay, and that just goes to show how fragile oral histories are. Like if you don't pass them on like the way they're supposed to be passed on, that's how fragile they are. And I saw this as an important opportunity to preserve what had happened, not from an academic standpoint, but from an ill news standpoint. Like like we were there. Like what did we see there? And the other fascinating thing was, so in the 90s, we didn't hear nothing about it. And in the 2000s, I ended up moving to Ottawa, and I didn't really realize the impact or how big of a significant event the raids were, because when I met other Indigenous people from across Canada, Ottawa's kind of like this place where we gather.
Meeting place, yeah.
Meeting place, yeah, meeting place. I don't want to say it's where we gather. We reluctantly gather, maybe. But when people asked, when older people would ask me, like, well, where are you from? And I say, well, I'm from Listuguj. And they're like, oh, I remember Listuguj. I was there. But they're always telling you, like, like I was there, man. And I was like, what do you mean? Like during the raids. And they would talk vividly about, like some of them were just like, I remember bringing salmon. I remember bringing supplies. I remember, like bypassing the provincial blockades to get in, and making sure that that we had proper supplies to keep us going, right? And I was like, wow, this is fascinating. Like so just getting this outsider, an outside Indigenous perspective and what they remember. I was like, this is so important. How come I don't know about this? Like, how come I don't know about these like on the ground stories? So this was that was one of the things that kind of stuck with me in the 2000s, and those stories always stood out to me because, like I said, when I mentioned to a particular generation where I'm from, they always go back to 1981, and so that was really fascinating, and that's what it's never left me. And then when this opportunity came, I knew that I had to try and do something that would honor what I've heard, and since I've been around.
The thing about the histories that happen in the 80s is that they are so present in how our lives are structured right now, and that it's also quite relatively comparatively easy to do oral histories and to gather documents to be able to tell these full stories, and to think that even in the course of 5, 10, 15 years, the oral histories of this particular history, kind of gets diffuse, is really like highlights how important it is that we start talking more about things that are happening in the 80s, and to really understand how valuable these oral histories are to understanding who we are in the present.
Yes, and that's just it. Like I think it also goes back to placing value on our stories. It doesn't matter how old the stories are. We need to place value, like we need to recognize and put value on the stories that are being told. And it doesn't matter to me when it was told, like when these stories are being told or when it takes place. But yeah, like it's almost like one of those, we take it for granted, right? Like the 80s weren't that long ago. Like it's not that long ago for us, but for those that actually like really grew up or in their pivotal years during that time, they're in their, for like late 60s and 70s, and so we're losing, if we're disconnected from that generation, then that's how easy it is to lose any type of story, really, not just the ones that have hold really big significance, but these other big events that have impacted us and have shaped who we are now, right? Like I think we're in this weird era of like just kind of taking it for granted, or maybe like we're just bombarded with too much, and then I don't know. It's a weird thing.
Well, I think also because I as a as someone interested in history, I hate saying this, but I feel like our communication tools changed very rapidly. And so to think about like not having photographs on your phone, not being able to record things on your phone like right away, makes all of a sudden this everything before that seem kind of blurry. But actually, there are a lot of rich sources, including stories, to really highlight so much of that history, especially because it isn't told as readily as a lot of other histories. And I know you hate the question or the statement like I've never heard this story before, but maybe we could talk about the story itself. Our second question is, what is the story, to talk more about the 1981 raids.
So we went into a lot of detail about how I got the first part wrong. When I was able when I was able to get my, for lack of a better word, story straight, I created a narrative flow, and my mother-in-law was key in being around for the first raid, but she was also working at the band office leading up to June 11th. And so I used a lot of her information, or I asked her a lot about, like, what do you remember about this time, and how, and she told me about how chaotic it was, and how there was a letter that came from the province to cease. It was almost like basically a cease and desist, and we had until June 11th, and if we didn't comply, then that's when they were going to come in full force. Okay, so I didn't want to take away from existing resources. Alan As It Bumps Away has done an excellent documentary called The Incident in Listuguj, and that was a really important documentary for me growing up. When I saw this documentary, I was like, wow, that was my first exposure visually to what happened in Listuguj. Like I said, I was only a year old. I wasn't, and my parents moved to Boston during the raids. So that was a really important documentary, and I didn't want to take away from that. My focus for this particular story was kind of like the prelude. I wanted to tell the story before the story, and I had so many excellent resources and references. So I really leaned on my mother-in-law because she was working at the band office at the time, and she told me another story about how they received a letter from the province. They had like a 3-day warning, which was basically cease and desist. Take your nets out, or else. You have until June 11th to do this. So I really wanted to try and show through the other stories that I was able to collect the environment, the tension that was in the air, and what was it like those days leading up to June 11th. And I wanted to create a character because I was talking to a lot of people. I wanted to create a character that was kind of on the ground, seeing all these things, because no one person could have been at all these places all at one time. So I wanted to have this one character be present and see everything that I had heard.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things I love about your story in this place is that it just feels so people centric, and I love that you bring in characters that are young, that can be so relatable for young people as readers as well. And it really invokes a lot of emotion, as well as kind of like anger and fear and like confusion and like all of those different emotions so clearly in the way you tell the story. And I think it is such a interesting complement to the other resources out there, but to really highlight the kind of like historical legacy of this particular raid.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really tried to. When I was writing this, I was writing it. Anytime that I'm writing, I'm kind of selfish. I'm writing for myself, and I'm just lucky that people like what I'm writing. But I was trying to. I was basically, it was kind of like infusing a lot of myself, my curiosity, into the character, right? And you know, I remember I had a lot of questions growing up, and one of the things I was trying to infuse a lot of is the relationship I have with my father, who would take me out swimming. We wouldn't, not swimming, sorry, fishing. We would go fishing
He would go
along the
fishing.
coastline.
Perhaps you were going swimming.
Yeah. No, it was very, very clear. Do not disturb the water.
Okay, right. Okay, good.
Yeah, yeah. No, when it was, we would get up early, and but we weren't net fishermen. We were rod, so we would So I remember a lot of the stories, and even just a lot of the times I was asking questions. Why are we out here? A lot of it was like I was tired because we got up super early. But these were great moments because I learned a lot about the salmon cycle, or even just the life cycle of a salmon. Like a lot of it was, um, just this time that I had with like specifically cleaning the salmon. Like all these scenes, like this is from my childhood. Like this was what I remember. Like we would catch a salmon and how we would. I remember how he would explain how to clean it. The only difference is in the story it's by net, but for us, for my dad and I, it was on the rod, fishing rod. But yeah, it was those scenes were really easy to write. But it's a lot about like like, well, what would I have said, or what would I have done seeing these things at that age? So
Well, you can kind of get that. Like I know that your age during this time and your age in realizing that you haven't asked the right questions is different than the main protagonist in the story, but you can really get that kind of sense of wonder and community with that. Why don't we go over to screen share, and that picture that I showed we can maybe look at a little bit closer.
sure thing.
So this was the page that I just showed, and again, one of the really great things about this story, and I mean I think you see that throughout this place too, is like it's not just about this one event. It is about people and all of the different elements of their lives, and in which this is enmeshed in. And yeah, and so this particular scenes were very striking for that reason. And the fact that you're saying that you linked it right to your own experiences of your childhood, I think is just really extra special.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was really I don't know. It's one of those things. I guess one of the one of those golden rules, right? Write about what you know. So this was like there were certain scenes that were just so easy to write because I was just like, I know that like I experienced this, and this is going to fit so well into this story, and I really wanted to infuse like it's not just the experiences of what I heard, or like what I was hearing. I wanted to infuse my experiences into this story as well, right? So yeah, I was really happy with um being able to. I don't even remember writing this scene. Like it was just so organic. I was like, I'm going to put this in here now.
Well, I think I actually kind of like the idea of like a fugue state in writing certain elements, because this video series is for Canadian history teachers, and I always think about like activities and assessments, and it's there's so much of an emphasis often on like um telling a story, not necessarily that's objective. Teachers are doing a great job in identifying perspectives and subjectivities, but to like not put yourself right into it. And I think that kind of like making a narration to have, in the middle, now tell the story of like what a grandparent may have been doing at this kind of point really allows that connection to yourself in a really powerful way, and not necessarily with histories that are actually this personal to you and to your community and to your nation.
Right. And the other thing too for me when I was writing, this is a moment to preserve moments, right? Like this is like had an opportunity to preserve a moment that stuck with me, not just writing about something that has happened to our community. And I think I don't say that's what's missing in history, but you know what? It is about moments, and it's about how do we find these connections. Like everything I think we take for granted, um, impactful moments in our lives, and or we don't pay enough attention to those things that stay with you. And 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 even that line, like it really brings me back because I do remember like I do remember, like, I remember my dad always saying, like, like, this part, you don't cut this part. If you cut it, you're going to ruin the meat. And that, I was 5 years old when I heard that, and it's still stuck. Like, it takes me back to, like, just those little lessons, those little moments. And it's so important that not just for this story, but for anyone to really be mindful of key moments in your life and not try to hold on to them, but remember, like, these are important things, and cherish those moments.
Well, and that the moments that we might think of as like the big, impactful, significant moments, like weddings, graduations, those things, it, those often are the ones that we create, which are great, but it's like these small moments of interaction where it's like really a piece of you gets like put into place, like a piece of you gets built with these interactions, and to situate it within a larger history is just so exciting. So in my book that's for Canadian history teachers, I talk about how that students want connection, complexity, and care in their history teaching. And for me, one of the things that I do love about the story is the way that you bring in the connection with these complexities. That it's not just connection for the sake of connection; it's to really demonstrate the complexities of of the situation and of these interactions. And I don't want to insinuate that your story is complex. I want to say that in its simplicity, you are bringing up such complexities that I think is really powerful.
Uh, and that's my animation background. Like, that's the like
Okay.
that. I love it. I really love it when I hear people say, like, and I don't take it like, I really love it when people say, like, like, how did you get something so like, how did you do something that looks so simple, but it's making me think, or it's so profound. I'm just like, oh.
Brandon is the best interviewee that we'll have. We'll just use that clip in all of our promotions. How did it get so great?
But it goes back to, like, being a good storyteller too, though, right? Like, I remember, like, the stories that I grew up with were often the simpler stories, and how they were told to me. Uh, it's the nuances, right? And I picked up on those nuances.
It's the nuances that bring out that complexity that I think students are looking for. And I think that we really need to better understand in order to tell histories that do more decolonizing work. And so, I mean, that's another element of this, right? Like that nuance also ensures that we understand these stories that are not covered in textbooks.
Right. And this, I'm leaning really heavily on storytelling, and how I tell stories, and how stories are told to me. And and I remember just being this avid, I probably wasn't remembered as an avid listener, but I was really an avid listener whenever I would hear stories from my grandparents, or even my great grandparents and my parents. Whenever it was story time, I'd be sitting there like, oh my God, I'm getting a story. And it didn't matter what the story was. I was just eager to hear them tell a story. And the and they would tell stories in such a simple fashion, but I was always listening to the complex. Like, there was other layers in their stories, and the hardest part was trying to translate that. Like, how do I translate the nuances, like the just the subtleties that they were telling their stories, and how do I try and translate that in a written format? The great thing is, it's a lot easier to do in a graphic novel format or a visual format, because it kind of blended my background as studying as an animator. So I went to school for animation, and all the tips and tricks that we were told in school really lends itself to, I find, Indigenous storytelling. Like that, like, it was so easy for me to connect to these methodologies in animation, because I was just like, it's about um, it's about what you don't see. It's about what you don't hear, or it's like, what are you explain everything. It's what do you see and how is the character, what's the character saying with their body, as opposed to what are they trying to say versus what is their body saying. And those little things were so easy to me to write. I was like, to be descriptive in that fashion. And the other key thing too was being able to work with somebody who was an animator. So Tara Audibert, who is super phenomenal, is amazing. I can go on and on about how great Tara is. We went to school together. She graduated before me. She's Listuguj, and Listuguj are kind of like first cousins to Mi'kmaq, so we're very close in identity. We're very close, like, so when I proposed this idea to her, I was like, I'm going to do this book, or I'm going to do this story. And at the time, that was our 6th or our 7th story together. And when I told her what I was working on, she was all in. And I was like, I don't want to work with anybody else. Like, this is a story that we need to tell, right? And I trusted her fully because we've worked together before, and we both understand the language of animation. We both understand the language of visual storytelling. So it was really easy to, when I was writing my script, I knew it was in good hands, and I trusted her completely in terms of what I was looking for. But it was so funny too, because she was just like, this is a really great story. Like where did this come from? Or like, she thought it was a fictional story. And then when I told her like this really happened, her mind was blown. She couldn't, like, so we're still in this era of just like, like, I didn't, like, we have, like, people still say like, I don't know. And I gotta be, and then, I was like, yeah, this really happened. And she was just like blown away. So it was, I knew that we had to tell this story, and I knew that this was a great, like, I guess it didn't dawn on me how important the story was. Even after I was like, oh, I'm just gonna keep on writing and just see what happens. And
Oh, it's great. Oh, okay.
okay.
I really loved, it really resonated to me that you were drawn to visual storytelling animation as a way to align with Indigenous storytelling, not because I'm Indigenous or I profess to know that tradition in any kind of deep way, but in really highlighting all the kind of nuances that you don't just see in the text. And that really resonates. Like, I wrote an article and I did a video actually on the Louis Royale Chester Brown graphic novel, because although it was really, highlighted as like this decolonizing book, when I read it, I was like, this is the most sexist thing I've ever read. Like, when you were looking at all of the different cells, like, there are no women anywhere, and Red River and Métis women in this tradition is totally missing. And it's interesting that you can bring up so much more of that nuance and emotion, which you definitely can do in your story. But then there's also a lot of opportunities to kind of critically examine the visuals to highlight things that are missing, right? Like missing and that make people angry.
Well, and it's there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of responsibility not so much visual, but there's this opportunity, right? Like, this is all about opportunity on what, and there's still a dangerous, not so much it's dangerous, but I mean, like you just said, right? Like, the responsibility is representation. There's still a responsibility to representation. And then what does inclusivity mean? Who's in the, like, so it's just as important in animation, like, who's in the frame, who's, like, what's being shown to the reader. And then this is why it's so important to, like I said, I don't want to, this might sound bad, but I hate thinking.
No, that's the one we're going to use as an audio clip to promote.
There we go. Yeah, we're gonna, two of them like, and I hate thinking.
That's it. That's all you need to know about this video.
That's Brandon in a nutshell. I ain't thinking. Tune in tomorrow.
Tune in tomorrow for another non-thinking video. That's our specialty here.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to tune out? Hire Brandon. But I guess I don't like I tend to overthink. And what I find with my writing, or even when I'm starting to draw, I like to simplify or try to simplify, and but in an important way. Like I want to get rid of the clutter. Uh, what's been great with collaborating with Tara has been able to bounce off of each other. Like we've had a working relationship for the last 15 years. So when I say that I trust her, I really do. Like there's a lot of like there's a lot of insecurity as a writer also. But when you have such a great relationship, like the scariest thing for me is like, can you read my thing and tell me if it's good?
It's because your mother-in-law will be like, no, it's not good.
Exactly. Exactly. When you can get like, if you can survive that, I think after that, I was just like, here, read it. You like it? I don't care. I already had like my work destroyed by my mother-in-law. You got nothing on me.
I already know it's terrible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. But to be able to have that relationship, like I still get like, I'm still like, when I hit or when I write that end and then I submit it, or even when I give it to Tara, I know it's in good hands, but it took 15 years to build that trust, or even 20. We knew each other beforehand, but we didn't get a chance to work with each other. But to have that reassurance that I knew that she was going to do an excellent job, it was just one of it was to me a no-brainer. So yeah, I was just really fortunate. I'm really fortunate with the people that I've been able to surround myself with.
Who may or may not be thinkers.
Who may or not. Yeah.
Before we move to the last question, are there any particular cells or illustrations from the story that you want to highlight to maybe showcase your collaboration with Tara?
So the old man, this is the story that my mom told. Like he really took the axe. There was a line of people and he confronted the line of SQ officer, and he did pretty much draw that line in the sand with his axe right on the road. So this was a really important, and it was a tough scene because I wanted to make sure that it was done right. And endings are tough. I don't care. Like endings are tough on for me, or for any project, I think. But this one was trying to find that right ending, and these last few panels were tough to write, not just visually to visually convey it, but also to show the exact weight of what was happening. And especially that the last panel, right? Like where the cops do cross that line. The tension, it was just it was there, and it was how it was conveyed and how she visualized it was literally, it was how I envisioned it. So it was I don't know, it was
no,
it was tough to write.
It's so striking. Of course it's tough to write. There's no text, right? And as a writer, you work with text, right? So to be able to collaborate with someone that really understands the significance of that line and the weight of that, even just this panel right here, yeah, it's so will they, won't they? But because this one's bigger, you already know that they do, but it's just a really beautiful balance. Yeah, thank you for highlighting this as a way to talk about that collaboration. And
Yeah.
also, like, again, these, and I think too of like stuff about the Oka crisis, the resistance, right? Like these types of images too are just really striking.
Yeah, and I didn't want to take away from, like, I don't know, like, I want it to be impactful, and here's the other thing too, like, it might be a couple, like, when you're writing a script, you're still writing it, right? So how do
Right,
you
right.
write it, and then write it in a way that the illustrator can convey it properly, right? So there was a lot for me to, like, okay, there's a lot weighing on these panels, right? So, but once again, this goes back to trusting the process, trusting uh like when you collaborate with the right people, it's just trusting everybody, right? So there was a lot of trust uh in not just the story, but even, like, the weight of the ending of the story.
Yeah, yeah, no, I can see that. Thank you for highlighting that. I really appreciated you talking about that trust and that relationship. I got to talk with Scott Henderson, who did the illustrations for Richard Van Camp's work in here, but they've also done other collaborations. And Scott has worked with uh, David Robertson as well. And Scott's non-Indigenous. And so we did a little bonus video, and it was so cool to just like hear from an illustrator's point of view what that process is, and like the responsibility that he feels to to like convey a history that he doesn't know, in the same way that, for example, you and Tara work together. So anyway, that's just a plug for that conversation. But although I guess like Tara's invited too. We can do other bonus conversations. But to wrap up this, because this has just been so fantastic, our last question is, how does this challenge Canadian history? And I use like this, how does this, in a very broad way, because it could be like this history. It could be the fact that the 1981 raids is what we hear, but there is a history before that we don't hear. It could be like, how do we use your mother-in-law to challenge Canadian history? But it could also be about like the storytelling of it and the animation of it itself. So as just a way to kind of conclude, do you have any thoughts about how this is broad, can challenge Canadian history if teachers bring it into their classrooms?
I I think challenges can, or, well, this place is an important piece of work. Um, the authors, the illustrators, everybody that participated in this book. Once again, I, for one, uh, knew that we were doing something special. I just didn't know how special it was going to be. And there was a lot of responsibility and fear on my part. Like, I didn't want to mess this up. Um, but the other factor was the placing of value. I think my key takeaway from my contribution and the things that I do is, I hope that this sparks curiosity. I didn't want to be the spokesperson. I didn't want to be the one that says, like, this is what it's like. I wanted the reader to be able to say, like, I didn't know. Like the same thing with me. Hopefully, when I was doing the research for this, there were so many things I didn't know. I want that same feeling for the reader. Like, I didn't know about this. I want to learn more. And so I hope that, this challenges people to think differently, not and be critical about where they're how they're getting their information and where they're getting it from, and also to place value on oral history. And this is not just from an Indigenous lens, but placing value on all oral history. Like there's just different ways of preserving our stories, right? And our stories, regardless of the of when they take place, they have merit. So placing merit on our stories, that's my takeaway, and hopefully my challenge to readers.
I love that. I think that's such a perfect way to, I think that's a really thoughtful, complex way to end this conversation. So thank you so much for chatting with me today, for sharing this history with us, for sharing your mother-in-law with us as well, and your relationship with Tara and all of those different pieces. This was really fun and really informative and complex and not at all. So thank you.
Well, Alan, thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. And I you know what? I had a lot of fun too. So
Great. Well, until next time, thank you again. And sorry, how can people get in touch with you? How can people learn more about your work and everything like that?
Oh, here's a shameless plug now. So I'm on Instagram.
The whole thing is right. So yeah. No shame. Yeah. Plug away.
So I've done. So as mentioned before, this is not my first kick at the can at this. I've been writing for 15 years. I've been creating for over 20 years. You can see a lot of my past projects at birchbarkcomics.com. I'm on Instagram at writer Brandon Mitchell. And you can order this place through any bookstore, and you can also look for my latest book, Juju's Gift. It's on Chapters on Amazon as well.
All those links are down below. It was wonderful again. Thank you so much.
Well, Ellen, thank you very much.
Bye.